Why Honda's Unicam engine was so different. Honda's Unicam is one camshaft doing two completely different jobs, and that split is the whole engineering argument. It landed on the 2002 CRF 450R, Honda's first purpose-built four-stroke motocrosser, built as an answer to Yamaha's DOHC YZ400F. One carburized camshaft pushes directly on two 36mm titanium intake valves through shim underbucket lifters, exactly like a DOHC race motor. A separate lobe on that same shaft opens two 31mm steel exhaust valves through a forked, low-friction roller rocker arm, like an old pushrod-era design. Honda looked at each side of the head, picked the layout that suited it, and deleted the second camshaft entirely. Cylinder head height is the enemy on a dirt bike, and that's the problem this solves. A DOHC head needs two cam journals sitting side by side above the valves, two cam sprockets, wider cam caps, and a longer chain to loop around both. All of that mass lives at the very top of the motor, the worst place on the bike to carry weight when you're flicking from rut to rut or correcting a nose-heavy landing. Honda claimed the Unicam head saved 13.3 ounces over a comparable DOHC system. Sounds like nothing until you remember where it came from. Weight up there sits on a long lever from the contact patches, so removing it means the bike changes direction with less rider input and less arm pump on lap 12. The bigger win is the valve angle. The compact SOHC layout with its separate cam holder allowed a 21.5-degree included valve angle. Two cams above the valves physically force those valves to splay outward to make room, so DOHC can't get that tight, and Honda's own engine development engineer said as much when the bike launched. A narrow angle flattens the combustion chamber, which shortens the distance the flame front has to travel from the spark plug to the far edge of the piston crown. Shorter flame path means the charge burns more completely before the piston runs away from it, which means you can run more compression before detonation shows up. Honda ran 12.0 to 1 on pump gas in 2002 off the back of that. The intake side is where they refuse to give anything up. Direct bucket actuation is the stiffest, lightest path from lobe to valve. Nothing pivots, nothing flexes, nothing adds a bending path, so the valve does exactly what the lobe profile tells it to as the revs stack up. That's what lets you run aggressive ramps without valve float. Titanium intakes saved 15.2 grams per valve over steel, and lighter valves let Honda run smaller springs, which dropped the head height again. Lighter valve, lighter spring, shorter head, lower motor, lower center of gravity. One decision paying itself out 4 times. The exhaust side is where the rocker earns its money. A rocker gives you leverage, so a modest lobe can produce full lift on a big exhaust valve without a tall lobe sitting high in the head. Honda put a roller bearing on the rocker's cam contact face, which cut friction enough that the lobe itself could be made narrower and lighter. Then they got greedy with the packaging and press-fitted the spark plug pipe so it runs between the two forks of the rocker arm. The plug ends up dead center in the chamber where you want it for even flame travel, and the rocker straddles it instead of fighting it for space. There's a race reason for that rocker nobody talks about, and it's the decompressor. The CRF ran an internal pin rotation auto decompressor working through the exhaust valve train, and in 2002 that was a weapon. The YZ400F made great power but was easy to stall and a nightmare to relight mid-moto. Kill it in a rut and your race was over while you stood there kicking. The Honda fired hot, first prod. That's not a spec sheet advantage, that's positions. The decomp gap is still set off the exhaust rocker during a valve service, after you've set the exhaust clearance itself. Which brings us to the part that bites owners. Both sides adjust with shims, not screws. The intakes use direct shim under bucket. The exhausts carry shims sitting between the rocker arms and the keepers on the valve stems. On the 2002 to 2016 bikes, it's 0.16 millimeters plus or minus 0.03 on the intake, measured between the cam lobe and the lifter, and 0.28 millimeters plus or minus 0.03 on the exhaust, measured between the rocker and the shim bucket, both at TDC on the compression stroke. Honda changed the head substantially in 2017, so get your own year's numbers from the manual. Now understand what those numbers do over time because it's counterintuitive. Clearance closes up, it never opens. Every combustion cycle hammers the valve face into the seat recesses, the stem creeps up through the head, and the lash disappears. Titanium is light, but its face is soft against a hardened seat, which is why the intakes on these motors have the reputation. When clearance reaches zero, the valve stops fully seating, hot gas leaks past the sealing surface, the face burns, and compression walks out of the motor. The first symptom is not a noise, it's a bike that fires cold on the first kick and refuses to light when it's hot, because there isn't enough cylinder pressure left to make the starter do its job. And once the seat is receding, re-shimming is a stopwatch, not a repair. It buys you a few engine hours before the clearance closes again. The actual fix is cut seats and new valves, so log every reading in a notebook. One measurement at the bottom of the tolerance band tells you nothing. 3 checks trending tight tell you the head is asking for help before a valve burns. That same layout is why the 450 makes the power everybody loves. Fewer valve train parts means less parasitic drag and less mass to spin up, and the flat, high compression chamber makes torque low in the range, so the motor picks up RPM instantly off the bottom. Use it. Go a tooth taller on the rear sprocket and ride a gear high through corners. Taller gearing puts a smaller torque spike at the rear tire for the same throttle opening, so the tire hooks and drives instead of lighting up and spinning. Third gear where you'd normally be pinning second. Less clutch, fewer throttle chops, more forward. Then Honda proved the limits of their own idea. For 2018, they dropped Unicam from the CRF 250 and went full DOHC with finger follower rockers, chasing a high RPM curve. Intake lift went from 9.2 mm to 10.5 mm, exhaust from 8.4 mm to 9.5 mm, and a bigger bore with a shorter stroke pushed the rev ceiling to 14,400-900 higher than the Unicam it replaced. A 250F lives on RPM, and RPM is exactly what a rocker gives up, because the rocker adds mass and a flex path between lobe and valve. Honda's engineers admitted the old wisdom themselves. Rocker systems weren't considered suitable above 10,000 revolutions per minute, and they had to fight to make the 250's rockers survive past 13,000. Look at what that switch cost. The DOHC 2018 made 40.70 peak horsepower, 1.81 more than the Unicam 2017, but it gave away 4.39 horsepower at 8,000 revolutions per minute and 0.77 pound-feet of torque. Peak went up, the middle fell out. Riders who went back-to-back on the two bikes talked about how much grunt the old Unicam had off the bottom and how fun it was to lug off a corner. That's the whole Unicam trade in one dyno sheet. Strong where a motocross bike actually lives on a rough track, quieter where the marketing chart looks good. On the 450, Honda kept the architecture and reworked the mechanism instead. The 2017 bike got an all-new head with a narrower valve angle, and finger followers slipped between the intake lobes and the intake valve stems, where the old engine bumped the intakes directly. The forked DLC-coated rocker still ran the exhausts. Those finger followers let Honda run more aggressive cams, 10mm intake lift and 8.8mm exhaust lift, with 38mm intake valves and oval cross-section springs that carry higher loads at less installed height. That's when the downdraft intake arrived too. Straighter shot into the chamber, better filling at part throttle, which is where you actually ride a 450 on a rough track. One cam, rockers on both sides now, same philosophy, new hardware. The 2027 bike takes it further by putting the intake and exhaust rocker shafts on a common axis to stiffen the whole valve train. With the bore opened from 96 to 97 mm and compression pushed to 13.75 to 1. Rigidity is the entire point. A stiffer rocker path deflects less under spring load, so the valve tracks the cam profile even at the top of the range, which is the exact weakness rockers have carried since the beginning. The architecture traveled well beyond the gate, which tells you Honda believes in it. Unicam has run in the VFR 1200F and the Africa Twin, and the 755 parallel twin in the Hornet and Transalp is an 8-valve Unicam using the same principle, cam direct on the intakes, rocker on the exhausts, for a smaller, lighter head. The CRF 450 RL Dual Sport runs the same family with DLC finger rockers on the inlets and its own timing, 10.0mm intake and 8.8mm exhaust lift, tuned for predictable delivery in the rocks. So ride it like what it is, keep the air filter obsessively clean, because ingested grit is what scours valve seats, and seat recession is this head's one real weakness. Check your clearances on schedule and write down every number so you can watch them walk tight instead of finding out on a hard start Sunday. Gear it for the bottom and the mid-range instead of hunting a top end that was never the design brief. And on the track, crack the throttle early at the apex and let the motor drag you off the corner, because that flat chamber and that light valve train are making torque down low whether you use it or not.